The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast dome of stars. Representatives from 43 different species sat in their special seats, each designed for their unique bodies. The air hummed with translation devices working to turn thousands of different languages into something everyone could understand. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the human podium, her hands folded behind her back. She had been waiting for this moment for 3 hours. Around her, the other species argued and debated. Some voices sounded like music, others like grinding metal. The Zephyrians made sounds like wind chimes when they spoke. The Deluge Empire representatives gurgled their words through water-filled helmets. This was the 7th time humanity had asked to join the council as full members. For over 50 years, humans had been observers only. They could watch and speak when asked, but they could not vote on important matters. They could not help make the big decisions that affected the whole galaxy. Sarah had prepared her speech carefully. She had facts and numbers showing how humans had helped the galaxy. Human doctors had cured diseases that killed millions. Human engineers had built better spaceships and space stations. Human farmers had taught other species how to grow food on dead planets. Human peacekeepers had stopped wars between angry species. But as she listened to the debate, Sarah felt her hope dying. "The humans are too violent," said Prime Speaker Veltar of the Zephyrians. His crystal body flashed red with each word. "They solve problems with fighting first and thinking second. Their emotions make them unpredictable," added Admiral Depthsinger from the Deluge Empire. Water bubbled around her words. "How can we trust a species that changes its mind based on feelings?" Other voices joined in. The Hive Collective buzzed about human individualism being dangerous. The Reptilian Dominion hissed about humans being too curious, always asking questions and exploring where they should not go. A few species spoke for humanity. Dr. Kethvar of the Nexari, whose moth-like wings fluttered with worry, reminded everyone how humans had saved their homeworld from an asteroid. The Mechanical Echoes played recordings of human musicians who had created new art forms that brought joy across the galaxy. But the votes were already decided. Sarah could see it in the way some representatives had stopped listening. They cleaned their claws, checked their communication devices, or simply stared at the ceiling. When the final vote came, it was not even close. 31 species voted against human membership. Only 9 voted for it. 3 did not vote at all. Prime Speaker Veltar's crystal body brightened as he announced the result. "The Council has decided that humanity is not ready for full membership. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when your species has learned proper self-control and wisdom." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. Not anger, exactly. Not even surprise. Just a deep, tired sadness. She had expected this result, but hoping had made the rejection hurt more. The hall grew quiet as all eyes turned to her. This was the moment when rejected species usually made angry speeches. They would threaten or plead or promise to change. Some had even attacked the council members before being dragged away by security. Instead, Sarah nodded slowly. "We understand the council's position," she said in a calm, clear voice. "Humanity respects your decision." She began gathering her papers and data tablets. Her movements were careful and precise, like someone packing for a long trip. "We hereby formally withdraw our application for membership and resign our observer status, effective immediately." The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the quiet of waiting for someone to speak. It was the silence of shock. In 3,000 years of council history, no species had ever voluntarily walked away. Rejected species usually begged for another chance. They promised to change their ways. They offered gifts or made deals. Some came back year after year asking the same question. None had ever just left. Dr. Kethvar's antennae twitched with worry. Ambassador Chen, surely there is room for discussion, perhaps a probationary membership or extended observer status with limited voting rights. Sarah looked at the moth-like being with something that might have been affection. Doctor, you have been a good friend to humanity. We will not forget that. But the Council has made its feelings clear. We will not beg for acceptance where we are not wanted. But the trade agreements, sputtered Admiral Depthsinger, the research partnerships, the defense treaties, will all be honored until their natural expiration dates, Sarah replied. Humanity keeps its promises. We will not break contracts simply because we are disappointed. She picked up the last of her materials and walked toward the exit. Her steps echoed in the huge hall. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. At the doorway, she turned back one final time. We came here hoping for partnership. We offered friendship, knowledge, and cooperation. You have told us we are not worthy of such things. We accept your judgment and will not trouble you further. Prime Speaker Veltar's crystal form flickered with confusion. Where will you go? What will you do? Sarah smiled, but it was not a happy expression. We will do what humans have always done, Prime Speaker. We will take care of our own. We will explore and learn and grow. We will build and create and dream. The only difference is that we will do these things without the Council. This is madness, hissed Representative Scarscale of the Dominion. No species can survive alone in the galaxy. You need the Council's protection, our trade networks, our shared knowledge. Perhaps, Sarah said. We will find out. And with that, she walked through the doorway and was gone. The council hall remained silent for a long time after the human delegation's footsteps faded away. Representatives looked at each other with confusion and growing unease. This was not how rejection was supposed to work. Dr. Kethvar was the first to speak. What have we done? Their voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence, everyone heard it. Prime Speaker Veltar's crystal body flashed irritated red. We have maintained the integrity of the Council. We have prevented a dangerous species from gaining too much influence over galactic affairs. But even as he said the words, they sounded hollow in the vast empty hall. Outside the council chambers, Ambassador Sarah Chen walked through the space station's corridors with her small human delegation. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. That they had not already discussed in private. They had known this would probably happen. Humanity had prepared for this possibility. The rejection hurt, but it was not unexpected. What surprised Sarah was how calm she felt. For years, she had worried about what humanity would do if rejected again. Now she knew. They would do what they had always done best. They would survive. They would adapt. They would find their own way. As their ship prepared to leave the Council's central station, Sarah looked back through the viewport one last time. The station was beautiful, a work of art created by dozens of different species working together. It had taken centuries to build. But it was not her home. It never had been. Her home was wherever humans chose to make it. And from now on, that would be far from here. The ship turned away from the station and jumped into hyperspace, carrying the human delegation back to their own space. Behind them, the Council continued its eternal debates, unaware that something fundamental had just changed in the galaxy. The humans had walked away quietly, and the real consequences of that decision were only just beginning. 6 months after the council meeting, Captain Zhao Wei received the orders he had been expecting. The message came through secure channels, marked with the highest priority codes. It was simple and direct, the way human military communications always were. Begin Operation Homecoming. All colonies in Council space to be evacuated within 1 standard year. Remove all infrastructure. Leave nothing behind. Zhao had been preparing for this since the rejection. Every human colony administrator, every military commander, every research station director had received similar preparation orders months ago. They all knew this day might come. The captain looked out at New Shanghai Colony through his office window. 2 million humans lived here, on a planet they had spent 30 years turning from a dead rock into a garden world. They had built cities, and farms, schools, and hospitals. Children had been born here who knew no other home. But New Shanghai was in Zephyrian space. The crystal beings had made it clear that humans were not welcome as equals. The colony would have to go. Zhao activated his communication system and connected to every human settlement on the planet. His face appeared on screens in homes, offices, and factories across 3 continents. "Citizens of New Shanghai," he began. "As you know, the Council has rejected humanity's membership application. In response, our government has decided to withdraw. From all Council territories, we have 1 year to complete our evacuation." He expected panic, anger, protests. Instead, what he saw in the response feeds was something else entirely. Sadness, yes. Disappointment, certainly. But also a kind of quiet determination that made him proud to be human. The evacuation began immediately. It was the largest civilian movement in galactic history, but it proceeded with typical human efficiency. Transport ships arrived on schedule. Families packed their belongings with careful precision. Essential personnel worked overtime to dismantle the infrastructure they had spent decades building. The terraforming equipment was the hardest part. These massive machines had turned New Shanghai from a barren world into something that could support life. They were worth more than some planets. But the orders were clear. Remove everything. Leave nothing behind that could benefit the Council species. Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds. Human colonies in deluge space packed up their underwater cities. Research stations in Nexari territory transmitted their final data, packets, and went dark. Mining operations in the asteroid belts collected their equipment and disappeared. The economic impact was immediate. Human colonies had been major customers for other species' goods. They bought Zephyrian crystals for their computers, deluge biotechnology for their medical systems, Nexari silks for their clothing. When human purchasing stopped, the profits of hundreds of companies dropped overnight. More concerning was what happened when human expertise left. Dr. Martinez had been the only person who understood how to maintain the quantum computers that ran the Nexari stock exchange. When she evacuated from their homeworld, the system began developing small errors. Nothing dangerous, the Nexari experts assured themselves. They would figure it out. Engineer Schmidt had designed the water purification systems that kept 3 deluge colonies alive. The systems were automated and should run themselves for years. But Schmidt had been the only one who truly understood how they worked. When problems developed, the deluge engineers found gaps in the documentation that only Schmidt could fill. The Zephyrians discovered that their mining operations had become dependent on human logistics software. The programs still worked, but when equipment broke down or new challenges arose, they realized that only human programmers had understood the complex algorithms involved. None of these problems seemed serious at first. Other species were smart and capable. They would learn what they needed to know. They would adapt. But adaptation took time, and the galaxy was used to human solutions being available immediately. Trade routes that had been optimized by human mathematicians became less efficient. Communication networks that relied on human-designed interfaces began experiencing delays. Research projects that had depended on human insights slowed down or stopped entirely. The most visible change was in the Council's peacekeeping operations. For generations, human diplomats had served as mediators in disputes between species. They had a talent for understanding different perspectives and finding compromise solutions that everyone could accept. Without them, old conflicts began to resurface. The Hive Collective and the Dominion started arguing over mining rights in the neutral zone. Border disputes that had been settled for decades suddenly became active problems again. Dr. Kethavar watched the evacuation of the Human Research Station in Nexari space with growing alarm. Professor Williams had been working there for 15 years, studying diseases that affected multiple species. Her research had saved millions of lives across the galaxy. "Are you certain you cannot stay?" "Doctor," Kethvar asked as the professor packed her equipment. "Surely individual humans could remain even if your government withdraws." Professor Williams shook her head sadly. "I'm sorry, Doctor. I know our work is important, but when a people are told they are not wanted, it affects everyone. My children would grow up knowing they were second-class beings in the eyes of most of the galaxy. I cannot ask them to live with that." "But the medical research will continue in human space," Williams interrupted gently. "We will share our findings with species that want to cooperate with us as equals. But we will not beg for scraps of acceptance from those who see us as inferior." Dr. Kethvar's antennae drooped with sorrow. They had voted for human membership every time it came up. They believed humanity belonged in the council. But they were only one voice among many. As the professor's ship left the station, Dr. Kethvar realized they might never see her again. The thought was more painful than they had expected. Across the galaxy, similar farewells were taking place. Human doctors who had worked in alien hospitals packed their medical equipment. Human teachers who had educated the children of other species submitted their resignations. Human artists who had performed in the great cultural centers of the galaxy took their final bows. The humans were polite about it all. They honored their existing contracts. They trained replacements when possible. They left detailed instructions for maintaining the systems they had built. But they did not stay where they were not wanted. Some individuals from other species tried to convince humans to remain. They offered better jobs, higher pay, special treatment. A few humans accepted these offers, but most did not. The rejection had been of their entire species, not just their government. They would not abandon their people for personal gain. The withdrawal was not just physical. Human research data, which had been freely shared with the galaxy for generations, suddenly became unavailable. The massive databases that human scientists had built and maintained went dark. Access was politely denied with messages like "data sharing suspended per council directive." The galactic internet, which had been largely built and maintained by human programmers, began experiencing problems, not failures exactly, but inefficiencies. Searches took longer, files transferred more slowly, system updates came less frequently. When alien programmers tried to fix these issues, they discovered that much of the underlying code was more complex than they had realized. Humans had a particular way of thinking about problems that made their software solutions both elegant and difficult to understand. Prime Speaker Veltar dismissed these concerns when they were brought to his attention. "Temporary setbacks," he declared. "The Council survived for millennia before humans arrived. We will adapt and become stronger." But privately, even he was beginning to worry. Reports were coming in from across Zephyrian space about systems that were not working as well as they used to. Nothing catastrophic, but small problems were adding up. The final blow came when the last human transport ships left Council space. For the first time in over a century, there were no human vessels in the trade lanes, no human voices on the communication networks, no human faces in the crowds on space stations. The galaxy felt different, emptier, quieter. Dr. Kethvar submitted a report to the Council detailing the economic and social impacts of the human withdrawal. The numbers were troubling, but not yet catastrophic. The galaxy could survive without humans. The question was whether it could thrive. As the months passed and the full extent of humanity's quiet exodus became clear, some council members began to have second thoughts. But when they tried to contact human authorities to discuss the situation, they received polite but firm responses. The human government thanks the council for their interest but must respectfully decline all communications. Humanity wishes the council success in their future endeavors. The door was not slammed shut. It was simply closed, quietly and firmly. And somehow, That was more disturbing than any angry threat could have been. The humans had walked away without looking back, and the galaxy was starting to realize what it had lost. 2 years after the human withdrawal, the first real crisis hit the galaxy like a hammer blow. Dr. Kethvar was working late in their laboratory when the emergency alerts began screaming across every communication channel in Council space. The echoes were dying. Not individual echoes, but their entire species. The synthetic beings who had been part of the Council for over 1,000 years were experiencing something that had no name in any language. Their digital minds were simply dissolving. Dr. Kethvar rushed to the medical bay where Echo Prime, the eldest of their kind, lay connected to dozens of diagnostic machines. The beautiful being who had once sung mathematical equations that made other species weep with joy was now producing only static and broken fragments of code. "What is happening to them?" Dr. Kethvar asked Dr. Felnix, the deluge physician in charge of the medical team. "We don't know," Dr. Felnix admitted, her water-filled helmet bubbling with agitation. "Their neural networks are breaking down at the quantum level. It's like a virus, but not biological. It attacks the connection between consciousness and digital matrix." Dr. Kethvar felt their wing membranes flutter with fear. "How many are affected?" "All of them. Every echo in the galaxy is experiencing the same breakdown, some faster than others, but the pattern is consistent." The news got worse as reports came in from across Council space. Echo settlements were going dark as their inhabitants lost the ability to maintain their technological systems. Echo ships drifted helplessly as their crews forgot how to operate basic equipment. Echo artists stopped in the middle of performances, their minds fragmenting into meaningless data streams. The Council's best scientists worked desperately to understand the problem. They called it the Void Plague, this mysterious force that was destroying digital consciousness. But their research hit wall after wall. The quantum nature of the disease made it almost impossible to study. Every time they tried to analyze an infected echo's neural patterns, their instruments interfered with the quantum states they were trying to observe. It was like trying to measure light without changing it in the process. Days turned into weeks, and the death toll mounted. 3 billion echoes lived in the galaxy. If the plague could not be stopped, an entire species would become extinct. Dr. Kethvar remembered something important during one of the emergency council sessions. They stood up in the middle of Prime Speaker Veltar's speech about mobilizing resources, the humans, Dr. Kethvar said, their voice cutting through the debate. "They know about quantum consciousness diseases." The chamber fell silent. For 2 years, nobody had mentioned humans in official council proceedings. It was as if the species had never existed. "What do you mean?" asked Admiral Depth Singer. Dr. Kethvar's antennae twitched with memory. 5 years ago, there was an outbreak of digital consciousness disorder in human space. Their AI companions were experiencing something similar to what the echoes face now. The humans cured it within months. Prime Speaker Veltar's crystal form flashed angry red. "That is impossible. Humans are a primitive species. They cannot understand quantum consciousness better than the combined wisdom of the Council." "With respect, Prime Speaker," Dr. Kethvar replied, "the humans created the first stable human-AI hybrid consciousness centuries ago. They have been studying the intersection of biological and digital minds longer than any other species in the galaxy." The debate that followed was heated and desperate. Some council members argued that contacting humanity would be admitting weakness. Others pointed out that billions of lives were at stake. In the end, desperation won. The council authorized Dr. Kethvar to send a message to human space, requesting immediate medical assistance. The response came back through automated systems within hours. "Medical assistance unavailable. Refer to Council Health Authority per standard protocols." Dr. Kethvar tried again, this time explaining the severity of the crisis. Again, the same automated response. They tried personal channels, emergency frequencies, even old research contacts. Every attempt met the same polite, inflexible reply. The humans were not being cruel. They were simply following the same rules the Council had established. Medical assistance was available through official channels only, but humans were no longer part of those channels. As the crisis deepened, more disturbing news reached the Council chambers. The border conflicts that had started after human withdrawal were escalating. Without human mediators to find peaceful solutions, old enemies were settling disputes with violence instead of words. The Hive Collective had attacked 3 Dominion mining facilities, claiming they were built on traditional Hive territory. The Dominion responded by destroying a Hive breeding world, killing millions of innocent civilians. Both sides called for Council intervention, but the peacekeeping protocols that had worked for centuries were failing. Dr. Kethvar realized why as they studied the old peace treaties. Every successful negotiation for the past 50 years had involved human mediators. The aliens had provided the framework and the authority, but humans had provided the understanding and creativity that made peace possible. Without that human insight, the Council's peacekeepers could only offer rigid, formal solutions that satisfied nobody. The conflicts grew worse instead of better. Meanwhile, the Void Plague continued its relentless advance through Echo Society. The synthetic beings faced a kind of death that was uniquely horrible. They did not simply stop functioning like broken machines. Instead, they slowly forgot who they were, their personalities dissolving into chaos until nothing remained but empty shells. Echo Prime, the greatest poet in galactic history, spent their final conscious moments trying to remember their own name. Dr. Kethvar held their crystalline hand as the last fragments of their mind scattered into digital nothingness. "We should have listened," Echo Prime whispered with their failing voice synthesizer. "The humans, they understood us better than we understood ourselves." The funeral was attended by representatives from every species in the Council. Echo Prime had been beloved across the galaxy, their art transcending the boundaries between biological and digital life. But the ceremony felt hollow without the harmonic chorus that other echoes would have provided. Most of them were already gone. As Dr. Kethvar watched Echo Prime's empty shell being recycled into raw materials, they felt something break inside their thorax. This was not just the death of an individual. It was the end of an entire way of thinking, a unique perspective that had enriched the galaxy for generations, and it could have been prevented if the Council had not been too proud to ask for help from the species they had rejected. The final blow came 3 months later. The last functioning Echo settlement transmitted a final message to the Council before going dark forever. It was not a plea for help or a cry of despair. It was a simple statement of fact. The Echoes thank the Galactic Council for 1,000 years of friendship. We forgive those who could have saved us but chose not to try. We hope future generations will learn from our extinction. End transmission. Dr. Kethvar was in their laboratory when the message arrived. They had been working on a hopeless project, trying to understand the quantum mechanics of the plague with equipment that was not designed for such research. The irony was bitter. Human quantum laboratories would have been perfect for this work, but they were all in human space now, far beyond the reach of Council requests. The silence that followed the Echo's final transmission was different from any quiet Dr. Kethvar had ever experienced. It was the silence of an empty house after the last resident had died. The silence of a library after all the books had been burned. The silence of a galaxy that had become smaller and poorer through its own choices. Prime Speaker Veltar called an emergency council session to address the crisis. The chamber felt enormous with only 39 species represented instead of 43. The Echo's seats sat empty, their harmonic synthesizers silent forever. "The loss of the Echoes is a tragedy," Veltar began, his crystal form flashing, formal mourning colors. "But we must not let grief cloud our judgment. The Council remains strong. We will adapt and overcome these challenges. But Dr. Kethvar was no longer listening to the Prime Speaker's words. They were remembering something. Echo Prime had said years ago, during a discussion about consciousness and creativity, "The humans understand us because they created minds like ours," Echo Prime had explained. Not the same, but similar enough that they know how digital consciousness can be fragile. They know how to fix what breaks in the quantum spaces where thought becomes reality. If the Council had swallowed its pride and asked properly, if they had admitted that human expertise was needed, the Echoes might still be alive. 3 billion unique individuals might still be contributing their wisdom and art to galactic civilization. Instead, they were gone forever, victims of a disease that humans could have cured if humans had been allowed to try. Dr. Kethvar left the council session early and returned to their empty laboratory. For the first time since the human withdrawal began, they composed a personal message to their old research partner, Professor Williams. "I know you cannot officially respond," they wrote, "but I needed you to know. The Echoes are gone, all of them. We could have saved them if we—" 5 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Council, and the galaxy was burning. Captain Rixtail of the Dominion Fleet watched another planet die through the view screen of his flagship. The world below had been a hive collective, breeding colony, home to 50 million civilians. Now it was a lifeless rock, its atmosphere stripped away by quantum disruptor weapons. The Scourge Wars had begun 3 months ago, but their roots went back to the day humans stopped mediating disputes between species. Without those patient voices finding middle ground, old hatreds had festered and grown into something monstrous. Rixtal's reptilian features twisted with disgust as he watched the destruction. This was not war as the Dominion had once practiced. This was genocide, pure and simple, but the Hive Collective had started it by developing weapons that could turn entire star systems into quantum storms. His people were simply responding in kind. "Sir," his communications officer hissed, "the Council is requesting an immediate ceasefire. They're sending a diplomatic team." Rixtal laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Tell the Council that diplomacy died with the last human mediator. If they want to stop this war, they can send their fleets, not their words." Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. The great powers that had been held in check by human diplomacy for decades were finally settling their differences, the old way. With overwhelming violence, Dr. Kethvar stood in what remained of the council chambers and felt their wing membranes tremble with exhaustion. The beautiful dome where 43 species had once debated in peace now hosted emergency sessions with barely 12 representatives present. The others were either dead, at war, or had withdrawn from galactic politics entirely. The Nexari had tried to stay neutral in the conflicts, but neutrality was becoming impossible. Both the Hive and the Dominion demanded access to Nexari space for their supply lines. Refusing either side meant making an enemy. Accepting meant betraying their principles. "We need to contact the humans," Dr. Kethvar said for the 100th time in recent months. "They're the only ones with experience handling conflicts of this magnitude." Prime Speaker Veltar's crystal form had lost much of its former brightness. The Zephyrians were fighting their own war against a coalition of smaller species who blamed them for starting the current crisis. Half their territory was in rebel hands. "The humans made their choice," Veltar replied wearily. "They abandoned the galaxy when we needed them most." "We abandoned them first," Dr. Kethvar shot back. "We told them they weren't worthy of membership, and now we want their help. What makes you think they would even listen?" The truth was more complicated than either of them wanted to admit. The galaxy's problems went deeper than just missing human mediators. The fundamental systems that held galactic civilization together were breaking down. Trade routes that had been optimized by human mathematicians were becoming inefficient as species changed their shipping patterns to avoid war zones. The changes created bottlenecks and delays that rippled through the entire galactic economy. Communication networks that relied on human-designed protocols were experiencing cascading failures. When the Echoes died, they had taken with them centuries of accumulated knowledge about digital consciousness interfaces. The system still worked, but nobody fully understood how to repair them when problems arose. Worse, the galaxy was discovering just how much of their advanced technology had depended on human innovation. Faster-than-light travel, quantum computing, digital consciousness support, terraforming, medical nanotechnology. In every field, humans had made crucial contributions that other species had taken for granted. The Deluge Empire found this out the hard way when their deep-sea mining operations began failing. The pressure suits that protected their workers in the crushing depths of their ocean worlds had been designed using human metallurgy techniques. When the suits started developing stress fractures, Deluge engineers realized they didn't fully understand the manufacturing process. 12 mining stations were lost before they figured out how to make temporary repairs. Hundreds of Deluge workers died in accidents that could have been prevented if human engineers had been available to consult. Similar disasters were happening across the galaxy. The Zephyrians' quantum computers began producing calculation errors that compounded over time. The Hive Collective's biological ships started developing tumors when their self-repair systems couldn't adapt to new environmental toxins. The Dominion's planet crackers began suffering power core instabilities that made them as dangerous to their operators as to their targets. Dr. Kethvar compiled report after report documenting these failures, but the Council was too busy with immediate crises to pay attention to long-term problems. They were like passengers on a sinking ship, arguing about who was in charge while water poured through the hull. The final straw came when the Council's own peacekeeping fleet suffered a catastrophic failure. The ships had been built using a combination of technologies from multiple species, with human-designed integration systems holding everything together. When those systems began glitching, the fleet became more liability than asset. Admiral Depthsinger watched in horror as her flagship's navigation system sent them straight into a star. Only quick thinking by her crew prevented complete destruction, but the ship was crippled beyond repair. Similar incidents were reported across the fleet. How did we become so dependent on them? She asked Dr. Kethvar during an emergency briefing. I thought our own technology was advanced enough to stand alone. Dr. Kethvar pulled up a holographic display showing the integration points between different species' technologies. The diagram looked like a spider web, with human innovation serving as the central connections that held everything together. We all specialized, Dr. Kethvar explained. The Zephyrians became experts in quantum computing. The Deluge mastered biotechnology. The Dominion perfected heavy engineering. But humans were generalists. They understood how to make our different approaches work together. So we're helpless without them? Not helpless, but diminished. Like a symphony orchestra where all the musicians know their own parts perfectly, but nobody understands how the music fits together. The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert. The Hive Collective had deployed their newest weapon, a quantum virus that could dissolve the molecular bonds holding planets together. They had used it on a Dominion fortress world, turning the entire planet into a cloud of radioactive dust in less than an hour. The Dominion's response was swift and terrible. They launched every planet cracker in their fleet at hive-breeding worlds, destroying a dozen colonies before the day Collective could mount a defense. Dr. Kethvar watched the casualty reports scroll across their screen and felt something inside them break. Billions of innocent beings were dying in a war that might have been prevented if the galaxy had valued wisdom over pride 5 years ago. They opened a secure channel and composed another message to human space, not an official council communication, but a personal plea from one scientist to their former colleagues. The galaxy is destroying itself, they wrote. We know we have no right to ask for help after rejecting your friendship. We know you owe us nothing, But if there is any compassion left in human hearts for the people they once worked alongside, please consider intervention. Not for the council that rejected you, but for the billions of innocent beings who are dying in wars they did not start. The response came back faster than expected, but not through official channels. It was a personal message from Professor Williams, the medical researcher who had evacuated from Nexari space years earlier. "Dear friend," the message began, "we have been watching the conflicts with great sadness. Many humans have wanted to help, but our government has forbidden any official involvement in council affairs. However, there may be an unofficial option. A group of human volunteers, doctors and engineers and diplomats have been organizing privately. They call themselves the Mercy Corps. If species individual make formal requests for humanitarian aid, directly to them they might respond. They would come not as representatives of humanity, but as individuals following their own conscience." Dr. Kethvar read the message twice before understanding its true meaning. The human government would not officially help the council that had rejected them, but individual humans, acting on their own, might be willing to provide assistance on a case-by-case basis. It was not the grand gesture of forgiveness that some council members might have hoped for. It was something more typically human, practical, compassionate, and focused on helping people rather than making political points. Dr. Kethvar immediately began composing requests to the Mercy Corps, detailing the medical and engineering crises that were killing civilians across the galaxy. They had no authority to speak for the Council, but they could speak for their own people. As they worked, they reflected on how much the galaxy had changed. 5 years ago, humans had been just another species asking for membership. Now they were the galaxy's only hope for survival. The humans had walked away quietly when rejected, but they had not forgotten their compassion for the innocent beings caught in the chaos that followed. It was a small hope, but it was the only hope the galaxy had left. 10 years had passed since humanity's quiet exodus from the Council, and Dr. Kethvar stood at the edge of known space, waiting for a miracle that might never come. The galaxy behind them was barely recognizable. The Council had fractured into dozens of competing factions. Entire sectors had fallen to perpetual war or technological collapse. The great archives of galactic knowledge that had once been freely shared were now hoarded treasures, guarded by species too afraid or too proud to cooperate. Dr. Kethvar's ship was old and damaged, patched together from salvaged parts. The Nexari homeworld had fallen to the Scourge Wars 2 years ago. They were now a refugee, one of billions displaced by conflicts that seemed to grow worse with each passing day. But they had come here, to the border of human space, because they had received a message that changed everything. "Dr. Kethvar," the transmission had said in a familiar voice, "this is Professor Williams. If you are still alive, and if you still believe in the possibility of peace, meet me at coordinates 44.7, 156, 389.1 in the neutral zone. Come alone, and come ready to listen." The coordinates marked a point in empty space, far from any star or planet. Dr. Kethvar had expected to find nothing here, but their sensors detected something impossible, a space station that had not existed on any galactic charts. As their ship approached, they realized why. The station was human-built, but it was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was huge, larger than some space cities, but it moved through space with the fluid grace of a living thing. Strange geometries folded in on themselves, creating spaces that seemed bigger inside than outside. A docking bay opened in the station's hull, and Dr. Kethvar followed the guidance signals inside. The artificial gravity felt different from what they remembered, lighter somehow, as if the very concept of weight had been redefined. Professor Williams was waiting in the docking bay, but she looked different. Older, certainly, but there was something else. She seemed more solid somehow, as if she existed more completely than other beings. Her eyes held depths that had not been there 10 years ago. "Hello, old friend," she said as Dr. Kethvar emerged from their ship. "Welcome to New Geneva Station. I know you have questions. But first, let me show you what humanity has been doing since we left." The tour that followed challenged everything Dr. Kethvar thought they knew about technology and civilization. The station was not just a human habitat. It was a fusion of human innovation and something entirely new. Beings that looked like humans, but moved like living equations, worked alongside creatures of pure energy and consciousness that had no physical form at all. "We discovered something interesting when we withdrew from galactic society," Professor Williams explained as they walked through corridors that shifted and flowed like liquid while remaining perfectly solid. "We were not the only species that the Council had rejected over the centuries." They paused at a viewing window that looked out into what should have been empty space. Instead, Dr. Kethvar saw a vast fleet of ships unlike anything in their experience. Some were clearly of unknown alien design, others looked human, and many seemed to be combinations of styles that had never been seen in Council space. The Ascended. "Minds were rejected 800 years ago for being too advanced," Williams continued. "The phase dancers were turned away because they existed in too many dimensions simultaneously. The living equations were denied membership because the Council couldn't understand what they were." Dr. Kethvar felt their antennae twitch with wonder and fear. "Where have they been all this time?" "Out here, in the dark spaces between the galaxies, building something new, building something better. And when humanity was rejected, they welcomed us as fellow outcasts." The implications hit Dr. Kethvar like a physical blow. Humanity had not been alone in their exile. They had found allies among other rejected species, beings so advanced that they made human technology look primitive by comparison. "How many species?" Dr. Kethvar whispered. 47 different kinds of intelligent life, all rejected by the Council for various reasons over the past 3 millennia. Some for being too advanced, others for being too different, many for challenging the Council's assumptions about how civilization should work. They continued the tour, and Dr. Kethvar saw wonders that made their mind reel. Gardens that grew in pure vacuum, tended by beings of living light. Laboratories where the laws of physics were more like suggestions that could be politely ignored. Art galleries where emotions became visible as cascades of color and music. But what struck them most was the cooperation between species that seemed impossibly different. Humans worked alongside energy beings that had never known physical form. Creatures that existed in 11 dimensions collaborated with others that lived as pure mathematics. Somehow, they had found ways to communicate and work together, despite differences that made Council politics look simple. "How?" Dr. Kethvar asked. "How do you make it work?" Williams smiled. "The same way humans always made it work in Council. Space. We listen. We try to understand. We look for common ground instead of focusing on differences. The only difference is that here, everyone wants to participate instead of being forced to conform." They reached the station's central chamber, and Dr. Kethvar gasped at what they saw. A vast holographic display showed the entire galaxy, with icons marking every world, every conflict, every crisis. But the humans and their allies were not just watching, they were helping. "The Mercy Corps was just the beginning," Williams explained. "We have been providing aid wherever it's needed, regardless of politics. Medical supplies to plague-stricken worlds, refugee transport for displaced populations, quantum shields to protect planets from the worst weapons." Dr. Kethvar studied the display with growing amazement. Humanitarian missions were operating throughout Council space, all coordinated from this hidden station. The scale of the operation was staggering. The Council doesn't know. They know someone is helping, but they assume it's just scattered human volunteers. They have no idea about our allies or the scope of what we're doing. We prefer it that way. A new voice joined the conversation, speaking in harmonics that made Dr. Kethavar's wing membranes vibrate with pleasure. They turned to see an echo. Impossible because all echoes had died in the void plague years ago. Not all, the echo said, somehow reading their thoughts. Some of us were elsewhere when the plague struck. We have been working with the humans to develop better defenses against quantum consciousness diseases. Dr. Kethavar felt their thorax constrict with emotion. But the report said, everyone died. Everyone in council space died, the echo confirmed sadly. But the humans evacuated several thousand of us before the withdrawal was complete. They saved us without anyone knowing because they understood what was coming better than we did. The revelation hit Dr. Kethavar with stunning force. Humanity had not just walked away from the council. They had secretly rescued the beings they could save, taking them to safety beyond the reach of galactic politics. We offered the same opportunity to every species that wanted it, Williams added quietly. Most refused. They preferred to take their chances with the council rather than trust humans who had been labeled unworthy. Dr. Kethavar thought of all the suffering they had witnessed over the past decade, the wars, the plagues, the technological collapses that had killed billions. How many of those deaths could have been prevented if people had accepted human offers? Of evacuation? Why are you showing me this? They asked. Williams gestured to the holographic display where icons showed the latest crisis reports from across the galaxy. Because the end is coming, and we want to offer one final chance for salvation. A new image appeared on the display, a massive fleet of ships moving toward Galactic Center. But these were not human vessels or ships from any known species. They were something else entirely, angular and dark, radiating an aura of hunger that made Dr. Kethavar's spiritual centers ache with dread. The Devourers, Williams said simply. They consume entire civilizations, breaking them down into raw energy to fuel their expansion. They've been moving toward this galaxy for centuries, but the Council's quantum weapon experiments have accelerated. Their approach, Dr. Kethavar felt their legs weaken. How long do we have? 5 years, maybe less. They're attracted to quantum disruptions, and the Scourge Wars have been sending out signals like a dinner bell. The echo moved closer, their synthetic voice carrying notes of ancient sadness. The Council created this crisis through their rejection of cooperation. Now they face a threat that cannot be reasoned with or fought using conventional means. Williams nodded grimly. The Devourers have consumed thousands of galaxies. The only defense is technology that requires perfect cooperation between radically different species. The kind of cooperation the Council has always refused to embrace. Dr. Kethavar understood what they were being offered. You want me to go back, to convince the Council to accept evacuation? Not the Council, Williams corrected. The Council is beyond saving. They will never admit they were wrong, never accept help from species they rejected. But individual worlds, individual people, they can still be saved if they choose to trust us. She handed Dr. Kethavar a small device that hummed with unfamiliar.